I guess just as a start, since it's a coal-based discussion, that's why we had the wind turbines up here. And so for PacifiCorp Energy, we're frequently asked, well, aren't you headquartered in San Francisco? The answer is no. And so who is PacifiCorp Energy? We're actually the generation arm of PacifiCorp. We provide power to our two operating arms, Rocky Mountain Power and Pacific Power. Rocky Mountain Power serves Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah. And on the western side of our system, Pacific Power serves Northern California, Washington, and Oregon. We're all part of the Mid-American Energy Holdings Company group. We're all a group of subsidiaries. That includes Northern Natural Gas and Kern River Gas Transmission, both large interstate transmission companies. Another utility based in Iowa, Mid-American Energy, a small electric utility in northern UK, and also in the Philippines, and Cal Energy, which is primarily a geothermal and small unregulated asset. Last year, 2012, Mid-America Renewables was kicked off, which probably has some of the largest solar PV projects in the US. So this is the PacifiCorp system. Again, on the eastern side, you can see our states. Most of our coal fleet is located in Utah and Wyoming. Probably about 60% of that's in Wyoming, and the rest is in the other states. We have some coal assets in Arizona and Colorado as well. A fair amount of our hydro facilities are in the Pacific Northwest. A fair amount of wind, about 1,000 megawatts in Wyoming, probably about another 800 plus megawatts of wind under power purchase agreements. So a fair amount of renewables, and that sort of has an impact on some of the discussion we'll have today on resource types. So take a quick loop here. You can see here, 2012, our resource mix on an energy basis was predominantly coal, about 60% coal. As we look forward, as best as we can see in our integrated resource plan, and by the year 2022, we expect to be less than 50% coal. Again, that all sort of depends on how our coal assets live out their lives over the next few years as a Todd was relating to regional haze and also greenhouse gas regs. This is a sort of a pictorial representation of the previous two presentations, and it's produced by EEI. Unfortunately, it got the moniker of a train wreck, which I think was a poor description, because that assumes it happens all at once. This happens over a great period of time. In this slide, we actually added the regional haze portion because of any one issue. That's probably the predominant driving issue for costs and equipment upgrades that affect our coal-fired generation. So we've added that, and that's something that Todd mentioned in some detail. But they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. What do the electric utilities, what do the owners think about this group? Well, I can tell you, it looks about like that. Kudos to that. One of my associates I work with asked the question, says, why are the sharks smiling? Okay, we've already kind of gone through this a couple of times about what does this look like for coal and for gas. Simplistically, we have 1,100 pounds per megawatt hour. Now, it's kind of important to notice that's on a gross basis. That's different than previous regulations. And 1,000 pounds per megawatt hour for combined cycle plants, again, on a gross basis. Again, for new existing fossil fuel plants, new regulations are proposed for June of 14 and finalized by 15. And the states are expected to come up with their state implementation plans by a year later. So what are the implications to us? Now, please keep in mind this is within the context of an electric utility. We're extremely regulated. We operate in 6 different states. That means we have 6 different commissions that control our costs and how we set rates and what costs we can include in rate recovery. So the bottom line is, for coal-fired plants, it requires some form of carbon capture and storage. You can't get to the 1,100 without some kind of capture and storage. For gas, you don't need CCS. And so what this does for us, the implication of this is that it drives us towards gas. It doesn't really provide us with an option for coal. Now I can't tell you what kind of time frame that is, but that's what the implication is. For new resources that we're looking at, over whatever our timing horizon is for our integrated resource plan over the next 10 years, really coal's not on the table. And we'll get into some discussion why that's the case. And that is in no way to, say all these projects that are going on right now aren't great projects. I'm a generation guy for 35 years. I love the process, I love the technology, but just from the hard facts of utility regulation, CCS is, for coal plants, is just not a part of our future. Here's some of the other kind of issues that we're talking about with some of these projects. Demonstration plants on paper, of which there are a number, does not support a conclusion that it's a viable project and that it's a viable technology. There's no CCS projects operating in the U.S. that are of a utility scale. And to date, all of the CCS projects are based on enhanced oil recovery, which brings with it a slightly different regulatory environment and a completely different commercial environment. Now, the one kind of caveat to that is the Future Gen 2.0 project, which will have a saline injection. Again, that's still sort of on, it's still there, and it's not in construction or in operation yet. Other things that are of concern to us as electric utilities, which we'll get into a little bit, is that we are very concerned about cost capture and cost certainty. And one thing that we're really sensitive to is cost overruns, and to the extent that we can control costs. All of the CCS projects to date have experienced some degree of cost overruns, and this doesn't play well for a regulated group. Multiple CCS projects have been canceled. I don't know of how many of that are on the board that are kind of the stellar projects will go forward. But still, we're still seeing some rumblings on some of the projects that maybe they are in some jeopardy. Again, these are demonstration projects. One thing that we're really concerned about is availability and performance. So not only is technical viability of concern to us, but commercial viability is a concern. And the factors that are that it can be competitive with other alternatives. And for us, that means it has to be competitive with gas. And what we are looking for is certainty with regards to cost, performance, and schedule. Those are tough metrics when you compare them to the current state of CCS projects. So why no new coal? Again, we're an electric utility. We're mandated to provide electric power and service at lowest cost on a risk-adjusted basis. And of course, that takes into account what are specific regulatory requirements. Certain states have RPS requirements, and so we have to meet those on a state-by-state requirement. Regulated utilities receive cost recovery for deemed useful investments. And what that tends to do is discourage R&D investment. To the extent that a utility is successful in having their commission support R&D investments, that's terrific. We're somewhat of in a different environment where we have 6 different states, and trust me, they don't all think the same. For us, minimizing cost risk is critical in our environment. And cost risk comes in a variety of forms. CCS obviously increases the cost of the resource. We have technology risk with technology capture, performance uncertainty. We have operating characteristics of new resources. As I was mentioning, we have a fair amount of wind here in Wyoming, and what we're finding is that our coal plants now have to spend a lot of time moderating or adjusting their operation to wind. We don't have any gas-fired generation in Wyoming. We're actually a little bit transmission locked, which of course is a topic for tomorrow. And so that we find that we actually have to use our coal plants in a cycling, or not true cycling, but at least moving up and down quite a bit. And so what that does is it changes the complexion of what we think we're going to need for new resources. Combined cycle gas plants, in terms of flexibility, or recips, have flexibility that do not come in with traditional coal plants, and that's another aspect of CCS that I've not heard discussed yet. We also have a discussion about long-term geologic CO2 risk. We've kind of sort of ignored that, but no one stepped up to the table of, okay, we put the CO2 in the ground, who's going to take the risk after 30, 40 years after the operational phase is over? Who's on board for that risk? And for building a combined cycle plant, performance is a well-known capital cost risk is very limited. You can get should I say, a firm price for a combined cycle with a limited degree of cost risk. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but EPA has suggested in some of their consultants that we can achieve a fair amount of CO2 reduction through efficiency upgrades on the order of 5 to 9%. We think that more realistic number might be on the order of 1 or 2%, by and large, because a number of the upgrades are suggested we've already implemented. Some of the upgrades aren't frankly feasible, and it also doesn't take into account the operational profiles of how we're operating our coal plants. The more and more you cycle a coal plant, the less efficient it tends to be. That results in actually a higher heat rate. Of course, as more plants add more stuff on the back end, they tend to become less efficient. You've got bag houses, SCRs, you name it, all of which tends to drive heat rate upwards. Lastly, we've also proposed that we add which would be considered major modification, which raises the flag of an NSR review, which is almost your second worst nightmare. Okay, so greenhouse gas for existing coal. We don't know what they are. As Julio mentioned, I don't think we've got a glimmer of what that looks like yet. So what we would say is our coal plants we've spent a fair amount of money to meet regional haze. We're likely going to have to make additional investments with SCRs on a number of our coal plants. All of those kind of put those coal plants somewhat in jeopardy on the economic cusp of whether or not we're going to terminate those, or we're going to retire those units, or we're going to continue to operate them. If the new greenhouse regs for existing coal plants increases the cost burden of those coal plants, that may tend to accelerate the retirement of those coal units. And I think that's something that Todd mentioned before, is that this has the impact of retiring a coal unit, which already has a fair amount of investment. That means that the amount of investment that's unrecovered from ratepayers or from customers, utilities are going to seek that recovery. They're going to seek that recovery early. We're going to have to decommission that plant, which accelerates the decommissioning costs, and then what's the cost for also the replacement resource. So we would hope that they would understand that anything that tends to accelerate retirement of coal plants is not going to be in our customers' best interests. We would also hope that they consider in any kind of new regulations that are prepared that it not be done on a unit-by-unit basis, that it also considers a fleet process, and that also takes into account some kind of long-term glide path. Last, in terms of future CCS development needs, the idea that this new standard's on a gross basis as opposed to a net basis, I think it might need some additional reconsideration. I think that may make some winners and losers in terms of the technologies, and I'm not sure that's what the purpose of that's. So that may need to take into account. And one thing Julio mentioned about water is that in any kind of new resource, these emission standards need to take into account the need to go to reduce water use, which in some mechanisms is going to usually imply dry cooling. Dry cooling impacts efficiency negatively, so it needs to accommodate the fact that efficiency actually may decline in the future as we go to water cooling. The sequestration certification process for EOR applications need to be put on an equal footing for both CCS and EOR. I think Mr. Venn kind of alluded to that this morning. Continuing in-depth characterization, I think Wyoming's well ahead of the game in terms of that effort. In terms of full-scale demonstration, we've always been using this 1 million ton per year, sort of this metric that we have to do. A 500 megawatt coal plant produces about 3.5 million tons a year. Our Bridger plant would produce probably about 14 million tons in a year. So a million tons a year is almost a minimum, and longer than a year. I'm not sure you can see it over a year's period of time. It's going to be meaningful. And then last but not least is a federal process to address long-term risk for sequestration sites. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.